everyone. I am Carl Brewster, a leader here with God Word Ministries, where our pastors are George and Shelly Ann Watson. Here at God Word Ministries, our mission statement is as follows: choosing God over the devil at all times, going God's way as a church and our way of life. And our vision statement is inspiring people to go Godward by perfecting the saints for the work of the ministry and for the edifying of the body of Christ. This is Testimony Tuesday. Tonight we had the awesome opportunity to come to the streets of Greenwood, South Carolina with our good friend and brother, Minister Brian Bowie of Disciple Ministries. We brought it to the streets where his testimony began. So tonight, sit back, relax, and listen to Minister Brian Bowie's testimony as he tells you how it all started right here in the streets of Greenwood, South Carolina.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Testimony Tuesday. My name is Lavellis Brian Bowie. Most people call me Bowie. Most people call me Black Jesus. Most people call me Chewable because I was so fat when I was a little boy. But this is my testimony right here in Greenwood, South Carolina, right here on the street. To start off my testimony, I want to bring you to where it all began. Right here is my grandfather's house. Across the street is my grandmother's house. So my mother and father, they got together and they stayed across the street from each other. And from what my daddy told me, my mother and father used to sneak through the back door, and that's how you get what you see today. But just a little bit of the history. I was born in 1978 to Willie Bowie and Johnny Mae Wideman. And it was around the age of 4. That's when it all started, as far as some of the things that happened to me in my lifetime that gives you a little bit of who I am today. So I'll never forget this day. It was a normal day. And during my childhood, I used to always walk across the street because my granddaddy lived across the street. I used to always walk across the street to get $1 just to go to Bowles, which is up the street, to get some candy. But on this certain day, I couldn't get in the house, and I don't know why I couldn't get in the house, but I just couldn't get in the house. So I went back to my grandmother's house, and I told my mother, I said, "Mama, I cannot get back in the house." And she was like, "Go knock again." So through that whole day, I was knocking, and I was knocking, and I was knocking. Just still no answer. So I guess it was around about 5 o'clock. My father got off work. And I used to sit on the porch and wait for him to get off work. And at this time, my mother and father, they weren't together. They got married, but they had got separated. So I used to wait for him to get off work. And this particular day, he got off around 4:30 or 5. And I was sitting on my grandmother's porch, and I seen him when he pulled up. So when he pulled up, I ran across the street. Of course, he was happy to see me. And I sat out there and talked to him a little bit, and I was telling him, I said, "Daddy," I said, "Granddaddy is not answering the door." And he was like, "I don't know, he must be in there asleep." So as we proceed to go in the door, the first thing that we saw was my granddaddy with his head back in his normal chair, the way he sat at to watch TV. His head was back just like this, but it seemed like he was sleeping. But at the time, we didn't know that it was blood all drenched around his neck. So that's when my dad began screaming. And this is me as a little kid. I was only 4 years old. Looking at all this, I'm sitting here looking at my hero. I'm wondering what's wrong, why he has so much blood around his neck, and why he will not wake up. Well, come to find out, my granddaddy was having complications that day, and he couldn't breathe, and he slit his throat, and he killed himself. So that started a whole bunch of trauma. Now, my mother said that we should have gotten me some help at that time, but they didn't get me no help. So for a long time, I struggled with thoughts of death and anxiety and all of that. You can just imagine how traumatic that was to see your grandfather in a chair with his throat slit, blood around his neck, not breathing, father on the phone, crying profusely, telling me to go get some help, but I'm just stuck. I'm like in shock. I'm stuck, just sitting there. Like, what should I do? What should I do? As a 4-year-old kid, what do? You sit there and you cry. You sit there and you cry. So I sat there and I just cried and cried and cried. So my daddy got on the phone and he called my mother over, and she came over there. And of course they called an ambulance and all that. And everybody came over there to see that my grandfather, Booker T. Bowie, had slit his throat and he was dead, sitting right here in the chair in this house. That's one of my vivid memories right here in this house. And I always question, why would God let me witness something traumatic like that? Because this right here set me on a path of anxiety and just a whole bunch of fear, even about death, through my whole entire life. So that's a very traumatic thing to happen to a 4-year-old. And it sent me on a path. And from that point on, that's when I started spiraling out of control. I started getting suspended from school. I started acting out. I even started arguing with my parents, which that was crazy. Getting my butt whooped all the time, and it was just crazy. It was crazy. But I'm 42 now. This happened when I was 4. So you can just imagine the trauma, the hurt, and I can still recount everything that happened on that day. So I often ask God, why would you have me remember such a traumatic thing? And I just have to sit back and say that, hey, I had to go through it in order for it to be a testimony for somebody, because I did not go get no help. I did not go see a psychiatrist. I did not talk to anybody about it. Only thing I did was live with it. And eventually I got through it. So in the end, God is good. I didn't have to go through all that therapy. I didn't have to go through all this other mess. God had his hand on me at an early age, and he has been grooming me and moving me in the right direction my whole life. Now, when I was asked to do this testimonial, I didn't quite know what I was going to say. I had to kind of think back to, what would happen, if people kind of got a whiff of what I done went through. So first part, I showed you where my grandparents stayed at. The house you see behind me is the house that my mother and father actually got built from the ground up. But, challenges and, stuff happen in life. And, eventually, I say we had this house for probably 4 years before my parents lost the house. Now, I'm not going to go into all the scenarios about how they lost their house. Of course, my parents, they split up or whatnot, but they just couldn't afford the house no more. So we lost the house. But this house has a sentimental meaning and a sentimental part of what shaped me as the man you see today. Of course, I call myself the streets pastor, of course. And the reason why I call myself the streets pastor is because I'm from the streets. I've lived in every area in Greenwood. I've lived on Giles Street. I've lived in New Haven, Russell Street. I've lived in Wheatfield, Taggart Street, all over these streets and all over these places. I've played with people. I've got in trouble with people. And, I just lived in just about every area you can think about in Greenwood. But this house right here has sentimental meaning. This is the last time, well, I ain't gonna say the last time, but this is the actual time that I actually got to see a true family together. Me, my father, who's gone to glory, my sisters. We live right here in this house, right here on Giles Street. Giles Street got a lot of rich history. If you notice, up the street, you got New Market. If you go around up the Hackett Hill, you got Try Me. And back in those days, it was safe. You could walk the streets of Greenwood very safely with nobody bothering you. I was living over here when I was 5 and 6 years old, and I can remember walking to my friend Lance Padmore's house right over there in New Haven. So it was very safe. Of course, now I don't know if it's still safe, but hey, I'm right here in the hood, and this is part of what happened when I was 5 or 6 years old. We used to have a lot of things. We used to have a lot of get-togethers over our house. My parents used to do a lot of cookouts, and we just used to do a lot of family things. But in that, I will say that you can't put your trust in a lot of people. So I can remember vividly on one night in this house, family member of mine, I guess he was keeping us. I don't quite remember what he was doing here, but it was on that night that something else happened to me during my childhood that shapes the man that you see today. Now, a lot of guys, I will say, probably don't have the same testimony as me. God put me through it, I guess, so, I could tell people and bring people closer, to who he is, to bring forth some light to who he is. So it was on that night that we was playing in the house, and it was on that night that I was sexually molested by a family member who shall remain nameless. It happened when I was 6 years old. But that instance right there set me on a sexual addiction on like you wouldn't believe. So I will say that I struggled with my sexuality. Not saying that I didn't know if I was a male or a female, but I actually struggled with, was it okay for men to be with men and women to be with women? I will say that. So I struggled in the sense of, my identity as a young man, and I'm not ashamed to say that. And it was during that time that I went on this sexual cycle. By the time I was 7, I was a habitual masturbator. So I used to masturbate all day long, just all day, looking at dirty magazines and just anything I could get my hands on. It really messed with my cycle and it wasn't short after that I was introduced to pornography, and that set me on a path of self-destruction as well. So I would encourage people that's like me, that's been, you don't have to be ashamed about your testimony. You don't have to be ashamed about what you're going through. Hey, how you doing? Yes, ma'am. This your kinfolk house? Oh, my mom and daddy had this house built back in the 80s. Huh?
My mom just passed about 2 months ago.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
It's okay, 'cause everybody got to go.
Everybody got their time. You never know the day, nor the hour. That's right.
I don't know.
Say what, ma'am?
I'm saying, I'm 12 years old, man. I ain't old.
Yes, ma'am. I got a dog.
I want more than minimum to get some chicken, baby.
Okay. That mini market chicken good, right? That mini market chicken good. You gonna get out and get it?
I'm home with it.
You gonna get out and get it? I'll bring it to you. There you go, baby.
That's a dog.
That's $2. Okay? You welcome. You welcome. So as I was saying, that you shouldn't be ashamed about what you went through in life and what you got going on, because it's just a testament to your testimony. And you never know who you can help in that sense. Just telling people of what you've been through and what what the things that you experienced, because what I've learned is everything that happened in your childhood shapes you as the man that you are today. Now, listen to me on that. Everything that happens in your childhood shapes you to the man that you are today. So in my struggle with my sexual addiction, I used to get these vast memories of the things that used to happen to me as a kid. And it was at that time I was trying to figure out why I was struggling with all these things and why I had so much tension in me, growing up, and just, the sexual addiction that I had. And most people probably don't even know I went through this. I masked it for years. People don't even know that, I was molested. People don't even know that, I did find my grandfather with his throat slit. Those traumatic things happened to me. But I want to encourage you on today is if you have been through those things, just speak about it, because you'll never know what happens. And see, in that, just like I was saying, let me get back on track. Just like I was saying, God started to show me things that happened in my childhood. So if you're going to deal with some stuff that happens, in your life, you first have to revert back to where it comes from. I always wondered why I struggled. I never understood it. I never understood the sexual desires I had, growing up, going to clubs and, trying to sleep with this woman and that woman. I had to have something when I left the club. I would find somebody to sleep with. People don't even know that as well. So you have to go back to your childhood to actually understand, what it is that you're struggling with. And sexual addiction for me, it was things like that, me getting molested, that shaped the person that I am today. It showed me that a lot of my sexual desires came from when I was molested. Now, I wouldn't say that I was attracted to men, of course not. Of course, it made me actually gave me a disgust towards, any type of same-sex type thing. But it did send me on a sexual addiction spiral that made me get down on my knees and just cry out to God. So in the end, it shaped the very fabric of who I am. Now, I've ran all up and down these streets of Greenwood, starting at an early age when people used to pay my way to get in clubs. I was 16 years old. People used to pay my way to get in clubs, knowing I wasn't old enough to get there. But the people that I hung with, they would pay extra money for me to get in these clubs. And I used to see my mama's friends and they were like, boy, what you doing in here? You ain't old enough to be in here. So I was exposed to a lot of things, and I was doing a lot of grown-up things, even at the age of 14 and 15. And people just knew who I was just because of the different areas and all of the places that I lived at, when I was living in Greenwood. So fast forward, 2014, me and my wife at the time, we was pretty much the laughing stock of Greenwood. People used to talk about us. We used to fight all the time. We used to go through a whole bunch of trauma. But my sexual addiction didn't stop when I left here. Not saying that I was doing things against my wife. I wasn't doing anything against my wife, but I was still struggling with, my pornography addiction. I was still struggling with lust of the eyes. I was still struggling with these things secretly. I was still, smoking weed and drinking liquor heavily. I was still doing all these things, man. And, it wasn't until 2014, I'll never forget it, but I stopped smoking weed when I was in 2010. But it wasn't until 2014 that God kind of put his hand on me. And in that year, it was in that month that I met a guy. I used to hear about this guy. People used to talk about this guy, about this and that and this and that. And I just felt like this guy was a very interesting guy. And I'll never forget it, because one of his deacons, whose name is James Butler, he said, you know what? You should come to my church. A lot of what you're talking about, I believe that I have a pastor that's relatable to you. And I said, oh man, I ain't really studying by no church. I had left the church for 10 years. I grew up in the church, but I left the church for 10 years. And then it was in January of 2014, I'll never forget it. I went to Nicholtown Missionary Baptist Church, and I met Pastor Darian Blue. And I met this guy, and I said, who is this brother? He's a preacher in the pulpit with gold teeth. I had never seen that before. So, and I've had a lot of people. I've actually had pastors I would talk to drunk. I remember running up on Derek Scott, one day over to Rich's house, and I was drunk as a skunk, and I was telling him I wanted to give my life to God, and he's sitting there laughing at me, but he prayed for me. And it wasn't long after that I kind of got a touch from God. But I joined the church January 2014, and I hit the ground running. You know, the Bible speaks that whatever you instill in your child, they'll come back to that. So I was instilled in the church. My grandmother was a great woman of faith. She always prayed. She always had her hands upon me. And I know for a fact that it's my grandmother's prayers that has kept me here today. But it was in that I got to working in the church. I got close to my pastor, and I'll never forget it. He used to, when he first met me, he just had this look about himself that he would just look at me all the time. I'm like, wait a minute, why are you always looking at me like that? He's like, I just see something in you. He's like, why don't you come and have breakfast with me one day? So we went to this breakfast. It had to be at this motel or whatnot. And everybody in there was pastors. And I said, man, I said, why you got me in here? I said, I ain't no pastor. And he just laughed about it. But now that I think back on it, he's seen something in me that I didn't see in myself. And, you could be struggling with something, but it's always somebody else that's going to see something in you, actually, before you see it in yourself. And I wrestle with that. And I used to always ask God, I'm like, God, what it is that you want me to do? What is it that you want me to do? I know I'm here for a purpose. I know I have greatness in me. I know it's something inside of me that I can give to people. What is it that you want me to do? And I used to always hear, you're a preacher. You preach. You're a street preacher. You're a preacher. You preach. You preach. And I was like, man, I'm saying that hearing all these voices in my head. And I'm like, nah, I ain't no pastor. I don't preach. You must don't know all the stuff I done did, all the nasty and dirty things I did behind the scene that people don't even know about. And I struggled with that for a long time. And it just got to a point where I just couldn't run from it no more. And I remember that night so vividly. I was actually getting drunk. I was actually getting drunk in my house. And I can remember hearing this so vividly. Stop running. Stop running from me. And it just kept going on. I went to sleep on that. Because I was like, I'm just drunk. I'm drunk. I ain't heard that. Just stop running. And I woke up that morning, I kept hearing that. Stop running. Stop running. You're a preacher. Stop running. Stop running. Stop running. I just kept hearing that. Stop running. Stop running. And just finally, I text my pastor with that same thing. I said, I hit him with the text. I said, man, I've been telling you for a long time that, I don't believe that, I am a preacher. I don't believe that I am a pastor. But God keep telling me that, he wants me to preach. And I was sitting there anxiously, I ain't gonna lie, I was sitting there anxiously awaiting to see what he was gonna say. And he texted me back. I'll never forget it. He texted me back and he said, I was just waiting on you to say it. And I'll never forget that. I'm like, man, I threw the phone. I said, man, this dude here is crazy, man. And he kept texting me, but I didn't even respond because I was just in shock. But it was in that moment. He didn't confirm it, but it was then that I knew that I had this special call on my life to minister to people on the streets. That's why you see me on the streets. That's why you hear me talking about me being in the streets. I mean, I've been in these streets for a long time. So, I know a good bit about streets. I know a good bit about, drugs. I know a good bit about, violence and all that stuff. I'm not saying that I'm some kind of gangster or anything like that, but I'm relatable to the guys that God had. Just like Paul, when God sent Paul to Rome, Paul was relatable. That's why God sent him. So as you can see, I'm relatable to the streets, and that's why he called me. And in that whole fiasco, man, doing all this work in the church, coming to Greenwood all the time. God told me, you're going to come here. I want you to do ministry here. And I'm like, in Greenwood? And I'm like, man, these guys know who I am, you know? Like, they know me. They're not going to receive me. And I'm thinking about how Jesus went to his own home and they didn't receive him. But he said, no, you're going to come here. And that's where I'm at. I'm right here. So in all of that, and all of the hurt, the pain, and all of the, trauma that happened to me, I knew there was a purpose. And the purpose was to birth this ministry, Disciples Ministry, that I'm the pastor of and that I've gotten off the ground. So what you see is what you get. I don't have anything to hide. I'm free to be who I am. And it starts with your testimony. I want to thank George and Shelly Ann, pastor and co-pastor of God Word, just for even entrusting me to even be on the screen and do this for God Word. They are such awesome people, man. They even in when I first started, I can remember Pastor Watson whispering in my ear, "It's in you, bro." I never forget that. He should tell me all the time. He even texts me out the blue, "It's in you, bro. Don't lose that. You got it. You got it." He just don't know how that made me feel. He just don't know the animal he created in that, because it made me lose a fear of people wondering, why am I doing this, or just even me, questioning my calling. He saw something. He said, "Man, that's you, man. You are the street pastor, man. You should keep doing that, man." And I want to thank you, Pastor George, man. You just don't know, man. Your words mean a lot to me. Co-pastor Shelly Ann, your words mean a lot to me. You guys believed in me when nobody else did. You guys gave me the confidence to be me. You guys gave me the strength to keep, running this race. I know God got great things in store for Godward. I can see Godward going worldwide. You guys have great hearts. And I'm just indebted to you guys for even having me on your Testimony Tuesday. This right here is big. Testimony Tuesday is big, man. So you need to check this out. You need to check this ministry out. They have a great ministry. They have an awesome ministry. I know them firsthand. I've seen their hearts. I've seen how many people they help. I've seen how passionate they are about bringing people to Christ, man. And I thank you, man. And I just want to, give a shout out to you guys. So this is my testimony. Peace.
Wow. Testimony Tuesday. What a powerful testimony. We truly, truly appreciate our friend and brother, Minister Bowie, from the Disciples Ministry. Your testimony is the key to unlock someone else's prison. Look at Minister Bowie, as he told us about his 4 years old, the traumatic experience that happened at 4 years old. Now, for the average 4-year-old, that might have just took someone down. They could be seeking counseling the rest of their lives, but God had his hand on him at a very young age. He showed him something very traumatic, and then kept moving him throughout his life and through the streets and into the streets. And as you can see, he's well known here in Greenwood, in these streets. So this is what he is. He's our street pastor who keeps it 100, who keeps it real, who tells you his testimony. We all have a testimony, and we all have something that we've dealt with and are dealing with. So your testimony, as I say, can be the key to unlock someone else's prison. So we thank you for joining us today with Testimony Tuesday. We look forward to seeing you next month with another powerful testimony. As we say here at God Word, God loves you, and so do we. And we truly thank Minister Bowie for his wonderful, powerful testimony. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next month.